All right. Well, hello, my friends. We are so happy to be here tonight. I'm so happy for my special guest, Claire Kingsley. I was already trying to say her name. I can't pronounce things tonight.
It's okay.
I had a couple technical difficulties in the beginning, as in me not sending the link to the right place. But we're here now. We're good. Just a couple minutes late. So yeah, I like to start just to give people time to like hop on, just ask like what everyone's currently reading, and we can maybe do that first too. If you are reading anything right now, hope that you're reading something.
So for me, I'm in between books right now because I just started writing, and I'm going through edits on
Sure.
books. So like I've got a lot of fiction in my head. But next up on my TBR is probably Nora Roberts' Identity, because I haven't read that one yet. So
classic.
It's waiting for me on my. I bought it a while ago and just the TBR.
Just writing it. I love it.
Yeah.
I just started Love Redesigned by Lauren Asher. So that comes out next week. So we'll see. That's a billionaire. I think they're like both billionaires kind of. So that's cool. That's rare that they both are. So good stuff. But yeah, and anyone who's watching, feel free to tell us. But otherwise, we're just going to hop right into the questions here. If this is your first time watching an author hangout, those who are watching, I have some pre-planned questions that we're going to go through first. But if questions come up for you as you're watching, feel free to throw them in the chat. And at the end, we'll save a little bit of time to get back around to those. And I may end up asking the questions you want to ask her anyway, because I have a list. So we will go ahead and get started with those. Okay, so the way that I like to start with every author, because you get such varied answers with this, is I always like to start with an author about what got them into reading first, because I think that can inform kind of where we end up eventually.
Yeah, I don't even know. I have been a reader since I could read. I remember like my mom took us to the library once a week, and so we would just get stacks of books. And I remember as a little girl, like always having a book on my nightstand. Like every night I would read. The books I remember reading, like there were some that made an impression on me, and I just loved, like I Love the Blue Dolphin. I read over and over.
Yes.
I read Anne of Green Gables over and over. Chronicles of Narnia, The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings when I got a little older. Stuff like that.
Solid place to start.
Yeah, I mean, and even as a younger child, I loved books. I remember getting not in trouble, but kind of scolded at the school library. I remember being in second grade, and I went to like the chapter book section, and the librarian was like, because I think our class had gone to the library that day. And she was like, no, you can't get books from here. You have to come over to the picture book section. And I was like, this is crap. Like I was reading, like short, beginner probably chapter books at that age. But I was already like, what are you talking about? Like, I read this stuff all the time.
Don't hold me back. What are you doing?
Yeah. I was like, no, I don't know. That memory sticks.
That's crazy. Yeah. When I remember when I was in fifth grade, I had to get special permission to read the high school side, but I did get like special permission to start reading on that side of the library, because the librarian knew me and was like, you can handle this. It's not
you're fine.
Too much. Yeah. We were like, you're good. We're just trying to be careful for some people. Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, that's super cool. Yeah. The same with always having a book. I read a book before bed every single night. Like my parents are readers hardcore too. Right. And so there was a rule in our house that you had to go to bed at like whatever my bedtime was. Like, let's say it was 9 o'clock. You had to go to bed at 9. But if you were reading, you could stay up another half an hour to read, which of course I never just stayed up a half an hour.
Right.
It was always longer than that.
Right.
But I mean, my mom trained it into me pretty quick. Right.
That's awesome.
I love that. So then moving right along then to what so many of us love you for, but what was then like your romance reading journey? So after you started with some of the fantasy and Tolkien and all that, like when did you first like discover romance, or if you remember when you did?
Yeah. So I read, I recently my mom found this box of stuff from when I was a kid, old school things. And I wrote a book report on a Daniel Steele novel when I was in 6th grade. I was like, I don't remember it at all. Obviously I did, because there it is. It was illustrated like cover page that I made. So yeah, but I've always read really widely, but read a lot of fantasy through high school and college in particular, and into my 20s. Actually, I started writing. That's how I started my writing career, was actually writing fantasy.
Okay.
But my sort of current, basically what happened is I was writing fantasy, and I always loved reading fantasy, but after writing 4 fantasy novels, I discovered I don't like writing fantasy, not as much as reading it. And so I was sort of
left rules and everything to follow.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, and there's like a lot to unpack there in terms of why I didn't want to write fantasy anymore. But I kind of was like lost. I was like, well, I thought I was going to be a fantasy writer. Like, that's what I've wanted to do since I was in high school. What would I write? And so I just kind of stopped everything, and I just started reading, and I read like just a whole bunch of different stuff. And I kind of landed on some romance novels, and I was like hooked. I was hooked.
Yeah.
And I realized, I started kind of picking that apart. Like, what is it about this that I'm so into? Like, why? And what would I like about it as a writer? Because I was really picking apart myself as a writer. Like, what do I like to write? What am I good at? How can, where do I go from here? And I realized I always love the love story in any book or movie or TV show or anything. It's always my favorite part. Like, there were fantasy series that I used to read where there'd be like this side couple who they're not even the characters, and like they get together, and it's my favorite. I'm in it for them now. I mean, like, the farm boy who's going to save the world, great. I hope he wins, but I want that couple to get together, and their wedding better be in the series. Right. I was like, duh. I don't know. This like light bulb went off when I realized, oh yeah, I always and I love like romantic comedy movies and The Princess Bride is my favorite movie ever. I mean, it just all suddenly made sense. I was like, duh, of course, this is perfect.
Yeah. That is so funny, because that, like, I had that same kind of realization when I was reading YA fantasy in like when I was like an adult, but I was still reading YA fantasy like we do, right? I just love it. Yes. And I already would read romance too, so I was always reading that, but I was like not being satisfied by the YA, because I was just like, I just want them to kiss and make up if they're like fighting or whatever. I was like, why aren't we spending enough time on figuring out this relationship? And then I was like, it's because that's not the main focus of the book, Jen. It's the slaying the dragons or whatever. Totally. So, I'm very happy with the resurgence of romantic fantasy right now. I won't lie, because it's both things that you love so much.
Perfect. Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay. Do you remember like some of those authors that it was for you? So I always like to get rising authors. So who are like your favorite romance authors?
Oh, no, this is a crazy story. So 2 of those books that I read early on when I was just trying to figure out my life and having an existential crisis were Lucy Score and Melanie Harlow, who are now like my best friends.
Yes.
And so that
co-author.
Yeah, I mean, that whole like full circle thing was just bananas. Like, when I met both of them at different times, it was just like I was like, oh my God, you don't understand. I love you. And not in a weird way, I promise. So it's really cool to have they both were part of that, like, that influenced me to try this. And now they're my best friends. So that's cool. Pretty great.
That's so cool. That's some of the fun too, I think, of that. You started reading romance. Well, not only, but you started reading when they were already writing books. That's where I'm thinking is, I'm like, so many of the authors I love from a kid, I'm like, they're dead already. I'm like, there's no chance to me.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, it's sad.
Yeah,
but
true.
Exciting that you found like contemporary romance too. Because like, I don't know, contemporary romance was kind of the last thing that I discovered, because I started with fantasy and then I read historicals.
Oh,
and then it turned out one of my favorite historical authors wrote some contemporary ones. Cool. And it like led me into it. But I don't know. Contemporary romance is a new thing for me. Okay. So I like that you had like found your way into that. I don't know. That's awesome. Do you have some of your favorite books of theirs? We won't tell them, I promise. But.
Yeah, I have them on my shelf. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. Oh, yes. Okay.
Oh, and if you're wondering what it was, if any of your watchers, listeners, readers, what do I say? I'm so awkward. If any of them are wondering what those books were, by the way, it was Lucy's Blue Moon series. I read that, and I read Melanie's Happy Crazy Love series. Those are the ones specifically that I read, and I was like in love. And there were other books I read during that time period, and I mean, I don't know. I could go back and look, but those were the books by my besties.
Yeah, I love that.
They didn't know they were going to be my best friends then, but they are now.
I love that. You manifested it. It's like, I'm an author now, and now you have to be my friend. What are some, you were mentioning just a book that before we went live we were live already, what you're waiting to read. Are there some like recent favorite ones you've read, or do you not read within what you write anymore?
I don't read. Yeah, I don't. I read an unfortunate number of books every year. I don't read a lot of fiction. I read a ton of nonfiction. So I'm actually always reading something. I always have a book going, and what I read nonfiction wise just varies like a ton. I mean, I read everything from like nutrition and health topics to like neuroscience and biology and psychology and like spirituality and all sorts of things. So anyway, I read a lot of that kind of stuff because it's easy for me to read nonfiction, especially if it's just something I'm interested in the moment, without it messing with my brain. I have a really hard time reading fiction while I'm also writing. So I tend to read a fiction book or two, like in between books. So like when I took my kids on it's been a while now, it was spring break, but I read a romantic suspense by, what's her name? It's gonna Toni Anderson, maybe. I feel that if I got that wrong, but that was super good. It was kind of FBI, sort of that kind of romantic suspense. It was really good. I love Nora Roberts. I find that her books are just always like they make me want to quit. I'm just like, I'm the worst. I'll never write this well. There are a lot of authors that make me do that, and I mean that in a good way. Like I like it when that happens because it's inspiring, once I get over my drama, like of texting Nikki, like I'm quitting, I'm never writing again. Yeah. And she's like, okay.
Yeah. The inferiority and like imposter syndrome can hit you no matter what craft that you're in, because there's always someone who we think does it better than us. And
and you know what? It's true. There are always people like, I don't know. I won't project on anyone else. There are always going to be writers who are better than me. Yeah. And thank goodness for that, because it means I haven't hit my ceiling.
Right.
Like that's a good thing. It's a positive. I can be dramatic about it, but it's a positive.
And I mean, it's not like your books aren't hitting the top of the Amazon list still when they drop. So I think you're still hitting with people.
I'm doing okay. Yeah. I'm doing something right, apparently.
That's that would be no, what did I just do? Made my questions disappear. Oh no. Okay, so you kind of mentioned this, so we'll go back into it though. Back to, you wrote something else to begin with before contemporary romance. You want to tell us kind of how you started and what inspired you to do that?
I wanted to be a writer for pretty much my whole life. And when I was in my probably early 20s, not long after I got married, I was like, I think I should write a book. And that sounds fun. And so I just started writing. And that, of course, was back when I had aspirations of being, a fantasy author. And so I started trying to write, and I had no idea what I was doing. It was really bad. And I assure you, I say that, I've said that before because I get asked this question a lot. And I say like, no, it was really bad. And people are like, oh, I'm sure it wasn't. Stuff you were writing was bad. I'm like, no, truly, truly bad. And that's okay, because I needed to learn. But I also started like going to writers' conferences and reading books about the craft of writing and just trying to learn, like, how do you even write a book? And then I started having kids, and it was like my creative energy was totally wrapped up in like making tiny humans and keeping them alive. And so I didn't write anything for a number of years. And then, but I always wanted to, like, it was always in the back of my head, like, I still wanted to write a book. And then eventually when my daughter was about between 3 and 4, I kind of went back to, she's my youngest. Okay. And so it was kind of like life was getting a little easier. You know, the kids were they weren't toddlers anymore. Right. You know, so I kind of had, everyone was sleeping.
I was just going to say, sleeping regular hours,
regular hours. Yeah. Life was kind of like a little more, I don't know. I find, kind of as an aside, parenting, I find kids turn into pretty reasonable humans at about age 4, at least mine did. Prior to that, they're pretty wild.
Pretty lucky with that, I'll just say. My nieces are around that age, and I'm like,
oh, yeah.
No.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah. So I was like, actually, my husband bought me this Google Chromebook. Mm-hmm. It was like this tiny little cheap thing. It was all we could afford. And he bought it for me, I think for Mother's Day one year. And he was like, okay, like, time to write a book. Like, I know you it's there. I know it's in there. Like, let's do this. And so I started writing, and and eventually actually finished a book. And that was a whole other like triumph, because I was pretty not convinced. I was just really afraid that I couldn't. Like, I really had that fear of like, I don't know if I'm good enough to actually finish a whole novel. And then I did, and it was like amazing. And so that book went through a lot of revisions and a lot of work and a couple of editors and a lot of stuff. And eventually I published it, and, published 3 more after it. And like I said, sort of in that whole process, discovered like, I don't love this. This isn't going to work long term. So
with the fantasy ones.
Yeah.
So that's one of my other questions is, what was your first completed work? Are we still able to purchase this, or is it gone? Yeah. But what was your completed work?
Yeah. My first completed work was a fantasy novel. It's not available anymore. Part of the reason, it's not because I think it's terrible. I think it's decent. I mean, I think my writing now is way better. I've grown a ton, which, as you should. But it was supposed to be a series of 4, and I wrote 3 of them. And then I wrote kind of a spin-off standalone that sort of, it could be read as a standalone, but also told kind of a side story that was related. And that was about the time where I realized, like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I had about half of the last book in the series written, and I was completely blocked.
Oof.
Total writer's block. And I just hated it.
Yeah.
And I never finished it. And it's okay, because hardly anybody read those first books. It's not like they sold a lot, It's fine.
There's a few readers out there who are like, she never finished the series.
I mean, there's maybe like one.
Yeah. No.
And it's someone I know. It's like really a friend. No, it's kind of a bummer, but it never made sense for me to go back to it. My heart wasn't in it. Mm-hmm. And so I eventually unpublished them, because I just didn't like that sort of hanging out there. Like, even if that one reader picked up that first book, somehow found it on Amazon randomly, I don't even know how anyone would find it. And then was like, oh, I'll read, cool, and then gets to the end of the 3rd book, and there's no 4th book. So
you have to be able to finish it and be proud of it. And it wasn't gonna. It just wasn't meant to be. It just wasn't meant to be. I learned a ton writing those books. I mean, they weren't a waste in any sense of the word. They were, just part of my journey. But they don't need to be for sale anymore. I think it's fun. I love seeing how authors have grown, but I also think that sometimes we don't need to know what the first books were like, because we like how authors write now. Mm-hmm. There's a couple authors who their series are getting really big, and they have some books that are unpublished, because once they started getting a lot of attention, it was like, I don't want anybody looking at these, so I'm going to erase them. Yeah. There's some authors who've done that for sure.
It can be kind of a tough call. I actually went through my first 3 romances that I ever wrote recently, and gave them not really a full edit, but just cleaned them up a little bit, because I'm redoing the audio for those. So I was like, well, if I'm going to redo the audio, it's a good time to just just give them a little quick. They're not long books. They're pretty short. I figured it wouldn't take me too long. It was good timing because I had just turned in a book to my editor. So I wasn't in the middle of anything. And it was hard. It was hard to revisit those books. And I don't think they're bad. And readers read them and say nice things and enjoy them, but they are not like what I write now. And I look at them and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I don't know. I just don't. Yeah. It's like I don't even want to tell people about them anymore now. I'm like, no, you can just skip those. It's fine.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like looking at middle school pictures of you where like your mom still thinks you look great and you're like, oh God, I can't look at it. No. Well, okay. So we trailed a little away from how I wanted to ask this one, but let's do this with the romance now. We've talked about that.
Yeah.
What was, I know we've said now it isn't this question got turned around a little, but what was the first romance you published and how was that once you decided to start writing romance?
So
like it was it for you,
Yeah, the first romance I ever published, it's now titled Behind His Eyes. It's the first in the Jetty Beach series. Okay. And when, it's funny, when I started writing romance, I had been, like I said, with the fantasy stuff, I'd been super blocked, super stuck, couldn't write, just really, really struggling. And that book in particular, I started it was just an experiment. I was like, I'd read these romances, I'd read a bunch of other books. I was like, well, maybe I should try writing romance. But I really had no idea how that was going to go. I hadn't ever written anything more than like some short stories that were in a contemporary setting. I hadn't written anything in first person. I always wrote in third person. And, the romances, not all of the ones I read were first person. Some were third, but some were first. And I wanted to try that.
Yeah.
Oh man, it felt very like, I don't know what's going to happen, but it was really freeing. Like it was like, I don't know, my creativity just like was on fire. I went from just barely being able to write to being like consumed with it. I just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. I wrote a lot. I wrote fast for like a year. And I knew, I could kind of tell like this isn't going to last. I'm not going to write this fast forever. But I wrote them just, first drafts at least went really quickly because I was just so excited. There was just something so freeing about being in a new genre and writing kind of with women in mind and, being able to be girly and silly and sexy and fun and in a way that I couldn't especially I wasn't writing fantasy romance. I was writing, epic fantasy. So it's just a really different audience. Anyway, so yeah, the first book was Behind His Eyes. And that is the one where I read it again and I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
But, it's just the way it is. Like if that book was as good as what I'm writing now, then I wouldn't have grown. And so that doesn't work.
Yeah.
I guess as writers, we kind of want everything. We want all of our books to be like super brilliant and amazing and whatever. It's like, well, maybe not.
It is fun as a reader though, when you get to see where like what becomes like an author's like go-tos and what you like about what they do. Honestly, like so many of the authors that are like favorites for me is because I found those places where I was like, this is the kind of story that they're writing. And when I went back in some people's backlist, you find the book that's like, this was the one where they started doing all of this.
Yeah.
That happened when I have went back into some of my favorite authors. And sometimes you're like, oh yeah, I can't read these because they obviously have changed since then. But then you find the book where you're like, this was the one in this series where they started doing what they're doing now.
Yeah. I think we all as writers kind of like, there's a place where we hit our stride and or maybe we just kind of find our voice. And I think those early books of mine, I was finding my voice and figuring out, and part of what I think I look at them now and I'm like, is I would have just done more, I would have had more layers and the stories they're just kind of short reads and they were at the time that was intentional.
Right.
But now I'm like, I could have fleshed this out. It could have been twice as long and whatever. Whatever. It's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes that's good though. Sometimes people just want to be able to breathe.
Absolutely. And I think people who like that series, they like it because they're light, they're short, they're quick. So people who they're not ready to like sit down and like unpack in a, town for 6 long books.
Sure.
That series works well for them. So
yeah. I love it. All right, now getting into, I always love asking this question because, of course, there is no typical day usually for yeah, there any kind of author, but I still love hearing it of like, I say it as like, what's your ideal average David of like, if everything went to plan and you got in the words you wanted, like, what would the day look like for you?
Yeah. Well, I have kids, so my kids' schedule kind of informs mine a little bit. I mean, they're teenagers, so obviously now they don't need as much of me as they once did. So, I get my kids off to school and then like, try to do things like work out or whatever, because I should be healthy. But once I sit down to write, like I guess on an ideal day, I would just sit down with a cup of coffee and I would start writing, and I would just write and it would all work and it would be beautiful. What it tends to look more like is me trying to stop being distracted by every little thing and various amounts of staring out the window and just thinking, because that's part of how I work. Some people just need thinking time, and I'm one of them.
Yeah. Well, you got to imagine what is going on.
Yeah. I mean, for me, a lot of what I try to do is usually there's just something in a scene that'll kind of hook my brain and get me thinking about, okay, what's important about this, or what's going to move the story forward here. And once I can find something, like even might just be a line of dialogue that I know they need to have, or just a moment in the story, then I usually can be off and running and write pretty, it'll work. It's when I don't really know what's happening in the scene or what needs to happen, and I kind of have to write it to figure it out, that I'm pretty slow. But that's okay. It just depends on kind of where I'm at in the story. But yeah, it's pretty simple. It's like my kids go to school, I do a few things in the morning, and then I sit down to write, and kind of just go until I'm in a pretty good pattern where most of the time I write about a chapter at a time through most of the book. I used to try to write like way more and a lot faster and all of that, and I can't really sustain that anymore for a variety of reasons. So if I write about a chapter, if I'm really in a groove and I know what the next scene is, I might just keep going. And if not, that's okay too. I've started, I've had to really work on that, like giving myself permission to stop instead of just exhausting my brain every day. There's kind of times where I like write a lot, and it's usually when I'm finishing a book, and that's great because I'm into it. I know what's going on. I know how it goes. Let's just do it. That's good. But I can't do that day in and day out. It just,
Well, and now with more of like the suspense, no, you can't stop at the edge of the falls. You got to keep writing. You can't cliffhang yourself. You got to.
Oh, I do. Oh, but I do all the time.
Oh my gosh.
I do all the time. It's terrible.
I'm not able to do that. Oh my goodness. Okay, so speaking of that, are you more character based or plot based, or the situation? What kind of gets you into for a new book? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question. It kind of depends on the book. Sometimes, so when I'm writing a series like this one, like the Haven Brothers, it really starts with the characters because I got to figure out which brother I'm writing.
Right.
And so then it's a matter of like, okay, what's his deal? What's he like? What do I know about him already? What have I established on the page previously that I need to keep because it's already been established? But like more, it's like, what do I know about him? Who is he? What's his problem? They always have problems. Like, what's your deal, man? And, and who am I thinking about pairing him with? Who's the right hair? Sometimes I know that, like, with the Haven Brothers, a lot less so. But like, yeah. So a lot of times with that, it is kind of character first because I'm thinking about, I have a cast of characters, or at least for one half of each couple already figured out. So I have to kind of start from there. But there's still really interwoven with that in the early part of my planning process is like, what kind of a book is this? And some of that is like, what do I feel like writing right now? Like, what am I excited about? Is there something that I really have never tried before? Is there something interesting? do I have any ideas yet? You know, do I know like what the conflict is going to look like? How are they going to, you know, why don't they just date and be happy?
Right.
You know, like what's holding them back? What's going to keep them apart? What's going to make this fun? Both for me as a writer and for people to read. So,
yeah. Do you think that ever gets you like stuck because you're doing the, you know, you're going to do the brothers, so you can't just like run off and do something else. If you got to do
yeah.
them, and who's talking to you, does that you run into trouble with that, or
Yeah,
did you with like the Bailey brothers or the Miles? You know,
it can be that can be challenging. I think that's where I go to like what kind of book do I want to write. So I, to an extent, with those other two series, the Miles and the Baileys. I left some of it open as I was writing, some more than others. You know, there were some books that were clearly, you know, like clearly Logan and Kara, like they're an enemies to lovers. That's set up from book 2 onward.
Yep.
You know, I knew what that was going to be. I planned for them. Book 6 in that series, I planned for them. Like that was always how it was going to be.
Yeah.
But like book 3, that was Evan and Fiona. I didn't actually know who Fiona was until it was time to like write that book. I didn't know who his heroine was going to be. I had no idea. So
that was my first one of yours.
Oh, was it? Awesome.
Yeah,
that one was like I just knew I wanted kind of the grumpy sunshine thing.
Yeah.
So that was where that came from, because I knew Evan was kind of a loner, and
yep.
I'm a sucker for that trope, for the you know, grumpy sunshine kind of a thing. It's one of my favorites to write.
Yeah.
So yeah, so some of like not getting stuck has to do with keeping some things open a little bit. With the Haven brothers, it's been even more difficult because you know, I sort of had a loose plan for the series, what feels like 800 million years ago. And I came to it and trying to start to write Obsession Falls before it was titled that. And it was like, I didn't know how to get excited about this series. I was looking at kind of my outline of the order I thought I would write them in and who the heroines would be. And not that I don't plan a ton of detail ahead of time. My brain just doesn't work that way. But I just looked at the whole thing and I was like, I don't care about any of this. None of this works for me. And so I gave myself permission just to like toss it and be like, okay, here's what I know. I know what town they live in, and I know what their names are, and I know kind of the family that they come from. And I have little bits and pieces of personality that showed up when they were side characters in the Bailey brothers. And that's all I've got. And that's fine. Like,
and now they don't have their rivals anymore. So who's going to be the drama?
I know. It's going to be different. And well, that's how I ended up kind of leaning into romantic suspense a little bit more. Cause I was like, I need something to get me like interested in this series. Like, I didn't even know if I wanted to write it. I mean, I was just looking at like, the person that I was who made this up, you know, so long ago is not the same person anymore. And I'm just like, okay, there's got to be a way. I didn't want to abandon it. I didn't want to not write the series. So that was how I ended up with kind of leaning, like I said, leaning into suspense, because that was like, oh, what if there's a stalker? Okay. And then my brain was like, oh, okay. So
that was really cool. I was lucky enough to get to listen to an advance copy of this one. I was on your ALC team, and funny enough, I think this was a cool side story. So one of my friends was then reading it the day it came out, and so I was waiting for her updates on it. And it was really cool because she didn't have the audio, so she didn't know whether the stalker was a man or a woman.
Yeah.
So her first thing is she was like, I don't know, is it this person's, like, is this a woman, or like, is it this or whatever? Which this isn't a spoiler, anyone, if you listen to the audiobook. I'm not telling you who the man is, but there's a man who voices the stalker.
Exactly.
And so I was like, oh, well, I'm not going to tell her that like it's a man. I'll just wait till she figures that out. I thought that was really cool because it was awesome. Like, it could have been anybody at the start. So I thought that was great.
Yeah. When I was trying to figure out who the stalker was, actually, I had this thought of like, can I make him think it's a woman? Then I was like, how do I do that with the audio? The audio listeners are going to know. I was like, that's not going to work.
Yeah, it was kind of pop, but it still was like, not everyone will get the audio. And she definitely thought that for the first like few stalker chapters she did.
Yeah.
So I was like, I won't tell her. I'll just wait till she.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Because I heard the third voice and I was like, oh, what's this? This isn't
That's a different dude.
Yes, I love that. So that was really cool. Let's see. Changing that up a little bit. I love asking this. So are there any other like subgenres of romance you want to try? You know, I know now we're going to get some romantic suspense, but now that, you know, kind of maybe being open to some other areas, are there others that appeal to you?
I don't know if there's any like major subgenres. Like, I don't know how far afield I would go. Okay. I was nervous about marketing this as, I mean, it is, you know, there's enough suspense in it. I don't feel like romantic suspense readers are going to be like, this isn't romantic suspense. But you know, like when you go from like rom-coms and small town romance, you know, small town contemporary, are my readers going to go for it? You know, if I go for something a little more suspensey, and especially if I market it that way, you know, I mean, there, you can kind of maybe get away with stretching a little bit depending on how you market something. But I was like, I'm just owning this, and it's going to look like a romantic suspense, and the blurb is going to sound like a romantic suspense, and I'm just going to call it that, and we're just going to see what happens. Clearly it's working just fine, which is so like vindicating and amazing.
Well, I think it's a good entry because it's still like characters we wanted to see. So, because I mean, I was going to read it no matter what, but I was like, oh, okay, with the Haven brothers, there's still the people you want to see. I think it's a good entry into it because.
Yeah, and it's not like I mean, people keep reminding me of this, and like, I know that it's not like I never had suspense before. Like, I'm looking at the Bailey brothers, there's like 3 kidnappings and an arson, and, you know, like there's excitement in those. And so it's not like I've never done it before, but I've never marketed a book like this before. So it was a little bit of a departure. Anyway, so I am kind of feeling out and finding where, how wide of a lane I have, I guess, you know, how far will my readers go? And it's great that they're on board for this. But like, I don't know, like as far as anything that you might consider really a different subgenre, I don't know. I think I'm kind of, it's hard to say, first of all, because who knows? I mean, it's going to take me a while to get through the Haven brothers, and who knows what, you know, CK in 2.5 years is going to want to do. But in terms of like tackling something that I haven't done before, I really want to write a marriage in trouble romance. That I have an idea, vague idea way in the back of my brain, and I have to hold it back there because it's not a Haven brother, by the way, just in case anyone's like, no. We know there was a married Haven brother. That's not. This will not be a marriage in trouble romance or a second chance romance. I'm just going to put that out there.
We need single dads, so it's good.
Single dad, great. He had a crappy wife. She's not coming back. Anyway, but yeah, like a marriage in trouble story would be, I think, really unique for me. Like, just, I haven't done it yet. And I'm always drawn to things I haven't done.
Marriage in Trouble is literally one of my favorites, but it's also very hard to do right. Because you have to have them be able to have a problem, but not be too far gone that we can't still love them. So
you gotta root for them.
We get it. Like there's only like 2 or 3 that are like favorites of mine, but it's a favorite trope of mine. So I love that you want to do that. So high hopes for it. Hope you get to write that someday.
Someday. I think I will. Yeah. I think I'll get to it.
I love it. Okay, here are some of the fun ones then that we will go. I guess I do have a lot of fun ones. I love asking fun ones. So there we go. So what was the fastest book you ever wrote?
It's called Always Have. And I think, if I remember correctly, that I wrote it in 16 days. That was kind of during my like obsessed with writing phase early on, pretty early in my career, my romance career. And it was one of those, like, I wasn't even going to write it. I don't know where the idea came from. It was just kind of had this idea and things just came together, and I was going to write a different book. And then I just stopped writing that book, and I almost never do that. Like I don't usually chase ideas. Like I want to finish things because I think if I let myself do that a lot, I'd never finish anything.
Right. There's
But
always a new plot bunny to chase around.
It always, and it always seems more exciting than the book I'm trying to write. But but it's not. Like I know that's a lie. It's always just as hard.
You're in the third act conflict, and you don't want this to write.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to write that.
Yeah, but yeah, always have was. It just was. I don't know. I was just really obsessed. I was already kind of in that phase of like obsessively writing like a lot, and I wrote that book in I think 16 days.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. What was like the editing of that? Like, was it a pretty good 60 days, or were you like, wow, I can tell I wrote this really fast?
No, I don't remember. I mean, I don't remember it being like messy or anything. I think it was.
I mean, I believe you. I was just like,
no, it's a fair question. It's totally fair question. Yeah, it wasn't like I just dictated the whole thing and it was a mess or something. Right. It was. I think it was normal. I think it was just that the story. I don't know. I was just really captivated by those characters and that story. And then, like I said, I was also just in a phase. Yeah. Where I was on fire. Like I just could write like crazy.
Yeah. So you just ride it. You're like, we're going to take it.
I did. I just went with it. I remember being to my husband being like, just get the kids McDonald's. I don't know. I got to get this out.
I love it.
Yeah.
So what was the hardest book for you to write? And hard can be however you choose to take it. Yeah, I don't hard, plot hard, whatever you want.
Yeah. No, I don't. So it's cheating because I'm not going to pick one. There's three. Okay. There's three that come to mind. The first one that was super hard is a book called His Heart, which it was just really, really, really intense. Like I intentionally I wanted to write a really emotionally intense book just to see if I could, see what it was like, see how my readers reacted. Mm-hmm. Spoiler, nobody reads it. Not nobody, but there are two books in my back catalog that are like, they're the ones that everybody skips. Most of us have those in our backlist if we've been around long enough. It's just a little too off from what my readers like. I think it's because it's like it's super ugly cry book, and people don't usually read Claire Kingsley novels for the ugly cry. Maybe a little bit of teary, like a little teary here and there is fine. Maybe some big feelings, but not like sobbing. And that's a sob book. And I admit it. It was very hard to write. And I was actually a tiny bit relieved. That book really bombed hard, and I was really sad and a tiny bit relieved. Because I felt like, this was before my career really took off. I was still really exploring who I was as a writer. And I think if that book had taken off and I had been like, oh, I got to keep writing really intense books, like, I don't know if that would have been good news. The next one was the Protecting You, Fighting for Us duet, the beginning of the Bailey brothers, just because that story was just really, it was hard to pull off. And I knew it was going to be hard to pull off, and I was just super determined to do it anyway. Yeah. And then Rewriting the Stars was very hard to write because, because my husband died in the middle of writing it. So sorry to say that really bluntly, but who would want to back to it? Yeah, going back to it and having to finish it was like just so. It was such a triumph, but it was just very hard. Yeah. But I'm really proud of it because of it,
Yeah. That was a really happy book to read. I know that's weird to say, but
no, it's good.
Really happy book to read. It's interesting to me of like, because I actually, not to get like too deep into it, but I discovered you during that hiatus time, because a lot of my friends were like, read her books. Let's read her books. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna read her books. So I started with Unraveling Him, like you said, because one of my friends did it for their book club. So I started there.
Oh, fun.
I read through 5. Then I went to Miles and read through. And then I read Protecting You. Because I was like, I don't want to see him lose her again. So I went all the way around the wheel first. But
yeah.
So that was a trip with everybody. But
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Well, I love it. I just have to ask people this. You don't have to really pick one, but what's your favorite couple that you wrote?
I'm not, I want to say I'm not supposed to have favorites, but
you have a favorite? Oh, I love it if you have.
Well, I mean, honestly, if I started talking about this question, I could probably name every couple I've ever written and tell you why they're my favorite, right? Like they could all be my favorite for different reasons. I will say Asher and Grace they just hold a special place in my heart. They just, that's their story. I actually sort of wrote a draft of it several years before I wrote what actually became their book. I was pitching it to traditional publishers at the time. And the finished product is pretty significantly different than the first book and much, 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 much better. But I think just something about having them in my head for so long. Like normally, you know, I've never had that process with a couple's story before. It's always like I think about them and I start planning and then I write their book and then I, go through that whole process and I'm done and then I move on. And this was like I wrote their book and I thought about them and I had, kind of the series idea and then I went off and kind of did other things and then I came back to them. And so they were just always kind of in there for such a long time. And like because I do get asked this question, of course, so I've answered it before. And like I've told other people, I think there's just something about them. Like I understand Grace. Like I just, it's not like any of it's autobiographical in any way. And yet I just understand her. Like I get it. I'm like, yep. I knew not everybody would. That was one of the things that made that book hard to write. But the other couple, I'm cheating again and I'm not picking one, but I have to shout out to Shepard and Everly from Faking Is Right, because that was the book that kind of changed my life. That was my first book that was like a big hit. And so they were so fun. Like that was just such a fun couple to write, such opposites. And yeah.
Love that. That's awesome. That's always fun. What's the weirdest place or time that you ever had a story idea?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. I can't think of a specific time where I was hit with something random, but it happens a lot. Just when I'm doing things. I think the worst is when I have had an idea while I'm falling asleep at night and I'm sure I'm going to remember. So I don't write it down. I'm in bed already and I don't want to get up or I don't want to grab my phone even and make a note or anything. And I'm like, no, I'll remember in the morning. And then I never do. And now I know better. And it's like, if I really think that maybe an idea is good, as when I'm super sleepy, and you know what, 90% of the time it's actually not good. Once I look in the morning, I'm like, what were you thinking last night? You were out of it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'm sure I've had brilliant ideas while I'm falling asleep and they're just gone the next day.
They're gone.
Yeah. How do you feel like your writing has been shifting? What do you see your writing journey kind of being?
Yeah. So I started off, like I said earlier, my early books are shorter. They're just simpler stories. There's not very many side characters. There's not a lot of side stuff happening. There's not a lot of secondary stuff happening. And then I started kind of shifting toward just writing more complicated, more layered stories to where, the backstories are deeper. The current stories have more going on. There's more prominent side characters that appear. And that sometimes there's even secondary kind of romances going on in the background. You might see side characters getting together, that sort of thing. And just where I don't know, like I said, they have more layers. There's just more, the stories are more complicated because there's more going on, which makes them harder to write, more challenging, in a good way. But yeah, other than kind of, again, now the most recent sort of little bend has been a little more suspense in them. But I think overall, my stories are longer and more detailed and more layered and there's just more depth to them than what I was writing early on. Early on, it was just really focused on the one couple and what are they going through. Right. And now there's siblings and friends and townspeople and, outside events that are influencing what's happening to them. So
I like that. I think so this was a question someone had sent me about how do you keep small town romance feeling fresh for you?
Yeah. Well, that's part of why I'm writing suspense, because nothing like throwing a stalker in the mix to freshen things up. Yeah. And I don't know, some of it was like, just, that was why I came up with the feud. Like, I just wanted, in the Bailey brothers, like, I just wanted something else going on. Lucy and I learned a lot writing together when we wrote Bootleg Springs, and that series has an ongoing mystery throughout each book. And that was really fun and really challenging to write, especially with two of us. But that, I don't know, that provided some like inspiration for down the road. Like, how do you like work something into a small town series that keeps it interesting and different, like something else going on in the background or something, like what else is affecting their lives? And yeah.
One of the things I think that authors do so well is creating that town that you want to come back to, right? Because who writes a small town standalone? Let's be honest.
Yeah.
People aren't really writing that, besides the fact that, series are a good way to pull people through a lot of books. But the fun of entering a new small town series is like, checking out everybody around and getting to know who's, who you're going to get to, right?
Absolutely.
So I think that, what you're saying about fleshing out like side characters better, that makes people excited for it. Like you talked about, like I was so excited for Kara's book because I was like, that sassy best friend, I can't wait to read her story. And it's like, I think that that's something that small town authors do particularly well because you're setting it up for more. So
yeah. And it's fun to just have like, it's funny what readers get really like into and excited about. Like the squirrel thing took on a life of its own. I had no idea that people were gonna like glom onto the squirrels the way that they did. And when I was like, when my beta readers read the first version of Obsession Falls, they were like, this needs more squirrels.
I had to put a trigger warning for the poor squirrels for my review of that.
Oh, I know, poor squirrels.
I was like, this is definitely turned up a notch, everybody.
I know. Poor squirrels, poor baby squirrels.
The squirrel, when I did my like guess who the next author was, I put a squirrel on the page and everyone was like, not a single person guessed it wrong. And I was like, yeah, I know, I kind of gave it away because I put like flannel and a squirrel and everyone was like Claire Kingsley. I was like, I know, but it was funny. I had to put the squirrel there.
Yeah, it's so funny. It's so funny. And, it's funny too, because I remember thinking about because, the squirrels start in the Bailey brothers, obviously. There's a Tillicum thing. And I remember thinking about that, like, what can I put? I want to put something kind of cute and funny, just that's like a thing here. What would it be? And I don't remember where squirrels came from, but I was like, what are squirrels? There's just like squirrels everywhere. That's cute, Squirrels are adorable. We can work with that.
Yeah.
But and then
they are everywhere.
And now it's this whole, they have their own little subculture and everything.
Yeah. Okay, so what book of yours do you recommend viewers start with?
This is always such a hard question. I think it depends on, you can kind of go one of two ways. If you want something that's more like lighter rom-com, go with Faking Ms. Right and read the Dirty Martini Running Club. But if you want to jump into the small town family series stuff, start with Broken Miles and the Miles family series, because the Miles family leads into the Bailey brothers, which leads into the Haven brothers. And just to be clear, you don't have to read, them in order. You don't have to read the Miles. I do suggest reading the Miles family series in order, just those ones, and then the Bailey brothers in order. That's how they were meant to be read. But like, if you want to start with the Bailey brothers, that's also totally fine. If that just appeals, you're not missing anything. So, or if you just want to read Obsession Falls, you're not.
That's right. It's a perfect time to hop in with her because this is the track she's planning to go for a while. So it's a perfect place to start. Exactly. So just one more of my pre-done questions, and then I'm going to go back through some of what they've been popping in the chat because we got a whole bunch. So
good. Okay.
What is the next release? So what's coming next?
It doesn't. No, it has a title, but I can't tell you.
Okay.
But it's the next Haven Brothers novel, and I literally can't say anything else.
All right.
I have
Haven
nothing
number 2 coming sometime.
Coming sometime. I mean, think spring, like probably next spring.
Okay.
I don't have a release date yet for a bunch of boring business reasons.
Okay.
you guys don't care about that. So, yeah.
All right. So let me go back through here. Sure enough, some people asked what some of the ones I got to. So trying to see.
Yeah.
What is something only you know? Oh, that's kind of fun. What's something only you know about the Obsession Falls characters that you would tell us? What's something that didn't make it in the book? Is there something you know about them?
Good question.
That was really clever. I like that.
That is a good question. And yeah, you're going to catch me off guard because it's been a while since I've been in that book, you know?
Yeah.
Let's see. What would you guys not know about them?
That's like expecting you to have lots of meta information about your characters.
I mean, you know, it's one of those things that like, if you asked me this while I was writing the book, I would be like, yep. But I mean, I'm literally like editing the next book. And so it's a different couple that's like in my head. So I'm trying to like rewind and go back. I don't know if there's anything like cool I can say. I want a cool answer, but my boring answer is just that I'm pretty sure that Josiah Haven is the oldest of his biological siblings. And that's not made perfectly clear. And that's a whole other writer drama that I'm trying to cope with right now.
That's funny you pointed that out because when I was reading, I was like, now is he the oldest one? Like,
I know. I was unclear, and just sometimes
you think you said it, you know, like you think you said it.
I think it's clear, or I think that it's in there, and then I realized like, oh, I never really explicitly made that clear. And for when it comes to the Haven brothers, their ages and birth order, it's a whole thing that
because I was trying to remember if you'd said in the Bailey series who was oldest, like based on that, but I don't really think that
No, I am confident in saying Josiah is the oldest of his group of biological siblings because there's 3 and 3. There's 3 boys and 3 boys, and they came together. And
Annika.
And then Annika is there, the baby together. And I'm pretty sure that the way that I actually wrote it, the problem is I'm not good with timelines and ages and being really consistent with that. Like some people's brains are so good at that, whether writers or readers, where they either want the consistency and the accuracy and they want to know all of those details, or if they're a writer, like I have writer friends who just, they figure all this stuff out perfectly. And I'm like, I don't know.
That's perfectly okay. I know Melanie has said that before because with her series where she like jumped time, she's like, this person should be this old, but we're pretending they're this old because I want them to get married. So they're doing she and I have had this conversation. She's like, I just pray that nobody does the baby math. And I'm like, I get it, especially with this one because I just set things in motion with the Bailey brothers, and I'm not a really detailed plotter. So I sort of discover like I'm not a total like pantser where I just write by the seat of my pants and don't know what's happening. I'm somewhere in between. But there's a lot of stuff where I'm like, if it's not relevant to the story I'm writing in the moment or the scene I'm writing, it just, my brain is like, I don't care. We don't care about this right now. Even if I try to figure it out, I'm like, whatever, it'll work itself out. And now I'm looking at all of like the little details and the hints of like who might have been the same age as which Bailey brother and like how did that all work out. And I'm like, I hope I didn't mess that up really bad. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there are people who know, but for me, I was just like, oh, okay, well, he's friends with him, so he's the oldest. So it's like, that works.
I figure, well, and then, you know, I jumped ahead like 6 years from the Bailey brothers. And so then I had to like cope with the fact that like, okay, so these guys are all in their 30s now, and yet life is all kind of the same. Why? You know?
But hey, that's okay. It makes it fun. This was a good one. Do you have a writing hangover after you finish a book? And we did already answer which books were harder for you, but do you get
Yeah.
book hangovers?
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, very much. Yeah. It's especially because at the end I tend to be just super obsessed with finishing and writing. I just write a lot. And I sort of come out like bleary-eyed and like I don't know what day it is. I don't know when I showered last. Because it's my brain is just super locked in to finishing the book and what's happening in the book. And
yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely a similar feeling to a reading hangover when I finish a book. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
This was a nice comment from Lizelle. She just wanted to say that she loved that you wrote a character with cerebral palsy and how the Grump saved Christmas because she also has that.
Oh my gosh.
So thank you.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. That was a fun character. I mean, she was just a little side character. But I did a lot of research on it to see, just to make sure, obviously to make sure that I had her life kind of portrayed well, just the way that she was handling it and how it was affecting her and everything. So I actually read, I don't even remember what it was. I wish I could credit it, but I read this really cool like online article that someone had read about their life, what their daily life was like, and use that to help me kind of understand it better. And so awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. She also asked, what's your favorite of Nora's books? So
probably Montana Sky or The Obsession. I think those are probably tied.
I used to read her a lot when I was in middle school and high school.
Yeah.
But I haven't read her in so long because I'm a completionist and I look at all of her books and I'm like, no. I can't look at them. So I need to get some like specific recommendations from people. But like I love the like Irish trilogy. She had like the Irish trilogy when I was young was one.
Cool.
And but anyway, that's cool. I love that. Oh, this is funny. If your book couples were stuck on an island, who would survive?
Oh.
They'd probably be pretty good at it. I mean, at least I'm thinking of our small town guys anyway. I think they
I mean, like who? Let's see.
Like, are they fighting to the death, Lizelle?
Leo Miles. I don't know. Like they're just surviving. Family. Yeah, like Leo Miles would 100% survive.
Yeah.
Like if I had to pick one to be stuck with, like to keep me alive, like Leo Miles for sure.
Yeah.
He would I think get me through. There's probably others. I don't know. He was the first name to pop in my head, so we'll just go with Leo.
I mean, he's been through some stuff, so
he's seen some shit, and Hannah was a badass too, so I think she would make it. I think they would make it.
Yeah, I love that. Barb wanted to say that Asher and Grace are her favorite couple. Aww. Grace is a 9-month partner helping to heal lots of tears while reading that book. Yes.
Yeah. I know. It was a little intense.
Yeah, it was a tough duet. All right. I think that is most of the ones that were sent. They were sending a lot while we were in there. Oh, here's a cute one. Did you base any of the Obsession Falls characters on people you know?
Not really. And I actually never do. I would have a hard time trying. So I definitely borrow random things from people I know or from people I've met or, things in reality, but they're usually really small things. Like, the thing that pops into my head is in Flirting with Forever. It's Nora and Dex in the Dirty Martini Running Club series. Like they have a neighbor, who wears red Crocs. And like my best friend, he's a guy, he's like my brother. I've known him since I was 19. And, he wears red Crocs and like I make fun of him like because they're just the worst and he just wears them super proudly. And so I was like, clearly someday I'm writing a guy with red Crocs in a book. And so I did, so it's like stuff like that where it's little things. Or like speaking of Leo, like his cat Gigs is and his nickname for Hannah is Gigs. And like I have a friend who her husband calls her Gigs, like that's from a real couple. And they're gamers too, I guess. So that's sort of true, but nothing else about them is like Leo and Hannah. But so, I'll borrow little details about things. But as far as the characters, when I create characters, they really like take on a life of their own. And I think it would just it would like limit me and slow me down if I was trying to make them be based on someone real. Because then I'd be like, well, what would that person say? And it would just kind of be, it's easier for me if they just get to be who they are in my head. And then that comes out on the page. So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Raven said Jude would survive.
Oh yes, that's true too. I was thinking about Jude. I know I'm over here looking at like what books have I written? Jude would 100% survive. Yeah, there's a bunch of them I think that I've written that would survive.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking some of our firefighters would do pretty good too.
I think so. I think most of the Baileys would manage. I think they'd hold their own.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Well, Claire, thank you so much for joining us for this. This was so great. I'm so glad I got to talk to you. And
thank you for having me.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what you have coming next spring or whenever. And I think I have some backlists to get into too. So that'll be
Well, enjoy that. Have fun.
All right. Well, we will go ahead and end the live part of this. Thank you everyone for watching. We hope you enjoyed this. And I have links to Claire's website and her social medias down below. So definitely check that out if you want to try some of these. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.